Okay.
Must be unmuted, must be muted.
Please mute everybody.
Mute, can you see? You must mute it.
Then the recording we started.
We will start in a few minutes. Please be patient. Inshallah.
No, wait, a while or something till it gets started.
Inshallah, we'll start in about 2 minutes. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. ربنا زدنا علما نافعا وارزقنا فهما. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Welcome you to tonight's panel discussion on the virus and the impact on Islam or the pillars of Islam. We have with us 3 distinguished panelists, all with a background in religious studies, and that is the focus for tonight. We will cover a few points in terms of how it relates to our practices currently and what the virus is all about in terms of our understanding from a Sharia point of view. Let me, from the outset, say that we are here to speak only the truth, and it is our main objective. And even so, if only one person speaks the truth, then that is sufficient for us. So we don't need a majority or to count numbers in terms of how many people are on the one side or how many people on the other side. It's not about that. It's about speaking the truth. And that is what the aim is tonight, to present the facts from a Sharia point of view. We have with us tonight Mufti Ibrahim Smith. I will give you some background on him in a moment. We have with us also Maulana Rafiq Muhammad and Dr. Imam Ahmed Salih. Just a quick background on Mufti Smith. He is a student of Darul Ulum Newcastle, and we studied for 6 years, and he started this iftar course at the same university under Maulana Sima rahimahullah. Thereafter, he went on to do his specialization at Fazl Ulum Donakal. He has his own school in Skarpral, and he has a program on Sirius FM. And what we will find out, obviously, in terms of what a mufti is and what how he derives his fatwa. I will ask him that in a moment, but let me introduce you to the other panelists. We have Rafiq bin Ismail Muhammad, who is also a graduate of Darul Uloom, and he has been an imam for a while, and after that he founded two organizations, the Foundation for Islamic Tarbiyah for Youth Development, as well as media research organization called the Alternative News Network. Then we have with us Dr. Imam Ahmed Salih, who hails originally from Cape Town and now in the United States. He was an imam in Cape Town before he left, and he had already also completed a degree in Cape Town, whereafter he completed his doctorate in the United States. So to move on, to the panelists, maybe I should ask Mufti Ibrahim just to give us an idea of how he derives a fatwa. Mufti, Bismillah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Salim, all our guests, all our listeners out there, respected ulama. MashaAllah, yes, sometimes people think to give a fatwa or derive at a conclusion when giving a fatwa is something easy, you know. We have to look at various sources. The easiest way would be to see if there's an existing fatwa written from our peers, our senior ulama that has been recorded before us, and from there we'll cite them. If not, we'll go back to the basics, our fiqh books, etc., going back to the Quran, going back to the hadith, sayings of the ulama within a specific school, and then we'll see what is the preferred view, what is not the preferred view. We deal with many issues, and sometimes we have to engage other specialists as well as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَاسْأَوْ بِخَبِيرًا, that ask those people who are specialists in their field. So specifically with regards to medical issues, I can mention one or two examples very briefly, like carmine or the code E120 that people consume in their milkshakes, strawberry shakes, etc. Anything that has to do with pink, or for external use like lipstick, etc. So people think that when we give a fatwa of permissibility or non-permissibility, it is just taken out of from the thin air. It does not work like that. We have to see the origin of this, and then we'll see it comes from bugs, and bugs is considered impure in Islam, and from there we will base a ruling that it is not permissible to ingest E120, but it be permissible for external use, or any other better for that, magnesium stearate that is used to cover tablets like metformin that our diabetic patients are using. So from there we first have to study what it is, where it is derived from. So we'll have to speak to our scientists in our medical fraternity as well. Then we'll see that it can be sourced from plants or it can be sourced from animals. So if it is sourced from plants, Salim and the rest of our listeners, then we'll see that the ruling becomes that of permissibility. However, if it is sourced from other than plants, from animals, then we'll see if it has been slaughtered shar'an according to Sharia or not, and then we'll give the ruling according to permissibility or impermissibility. So basically that is how we have to speak to various different people, and we need sufficient and adequate knowledge of medicine as well before we can give any medical fatwa. So it is not easy to say that where did the Mufti learn or study medicine. It is not because we do not know medicine or understand medicine, Salim. It is because we do not have an audience to speak these things to. It is only when things like COVID-19 or Ramadan medical fatwas come up, then people will actually see that the ulama is quite well versed in medicine or the field of medicine as well. Jazakumullah khairan.
Shukran for that. Maulana Rafiq, can you please just quickly give us an insight into your mission in your organization called Researching the Truth, Exposing the Lies? Just a quick update on that, please. Maulana Rafiq.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Brother Salim, and to the ulama guest speakers, and to all the listeners and the audience out there. Jazakumullah for the opportunity. Yes, as you mentioned, I had been involved previously with two other organizations which we had started off, but now I'm currently running an organization called the Truth Wins Foundation, which its mission statement is researching the truth, exposing the lies. And this has a long history because more than 20 years ago, I set out on a path which seems to be something that was chalked out for me because so many things happened in my life that made me think in this way. but I've been focusing on global politics and its impact on the Muslim world. And subsequently, after quite a number of years, a medical doctor who was a specialist physician from the UK had happened to attend a full weekend program. And at the end of that program, he actually introduced me to a book, because he said the people that you're speaking of, the modern pharaohs sitting in New York and London, they have also got their finger in the medical industry and the medical pie. So I was quite surprised to hear that coming from a specialist doctor. And he introduced me to the book called The Medical Mafia by Dr. Guy Langtot. And that's how I actually started researching health, nutrition, and the medical industry, which led me further down the line into the rotten state of the vaccine industry. So that's where I come from with all this discussion. And so even before the corona pandemic started to roll out, I already had this understanding that there's a lot of deception coming out from the mainstream media with regards to this virus that we call the coronavirus. Jazakallah.
Shukran for that. Dr. Salih, your venture from South Africa to the United States, have you seen much difference in terms of how Muslims operate from this side of the world to the next? Dr. Salih?
Yeah, I think when we look at the United States, can you hear me? When we look at the United States, then we find that sometimes the same type of human frailties and the human condition could be found everywhere. I've been part of an Imam's Council for maybe about 21 years since I'm here. And you have sometimes one person come up and then just 2 or 3 people really make the decision out there. But the good thing is we do have people that are very open to different opinions. And depending on one's exposure to the community, I've always preached, I could say, pluralism and not being monovocal about certain things. And so I think people respect that. And very often we went onto the mimbar and we thought, وَلَا يَخَافُونَ لَوْمَةَ لَائِمٍ. We don't fear the criticisms of the critics. And at times, even if it's not going to be in our best interest, but in the interest of the community, we had to say certain things. There's a certain ayah in Surah Yasin, وَجَاءَ مِنْ أَقْصَى الْمَدِينَةِ رَجُلٌ يَسْعَى قَالَ يَا قَوْمِ اتَّبِعُوا الْمُرْسَلِينَ اتَّبِعُوا مَنْ لَا يَسْأَلُكُمْ أَجْرًا وَهُمْ مُهْتَدُونَ. So you follow those people who's not actually in it for with any conflict of interest. They're not asking you for any type of remuneration for what they are saying, and they are rightly guided. And so sometimes you act like the voice that is alone. But the lovely thing is, with a lot of our networking with the interfaith community, we've been given plenty of courage, sometimes from other clergy that are extremely vocal. And so that courage really helps as one goes forward. After 9/11, I think I must have spoken more than 1,000 times in different mainstream churches, and many times opposing the wars in the Middle East and elsewhere and invasions. And then those church people would give us standing ovations. And so I think it's just broadening one's network, whether it's even going to speak to rabbis and speaking our mind, and even speaking to the authorities. That has just always been وَقُلْ جَاءَ الْحَقُّ وَزَهَقَ الْبَاطِلُ إِنَّ الْبَاطِلَ كَانَ زَهُوقًا. Just speaking the truth. Exposing also what is what we call labas, the mixing of haqq and batil. And oftentimes batil has got a very beautiful mask, and people do not see the wolf in sheep's clothing. So we were courageous enough to see that, also studying the society. And I think one last thing I want to bring to mind is I've been teaching at university and creating university programs since 2006. But then in 2017, I customized a master's degree for imams and for Muslim leaders. And we had 12 of them graduate from that program. It had a human rights component. And so they all wanted to go on to the PhD. And we were collaborating with a university in Malaysia, but then COVID came. So Alhamdulillah, I think there's a lot of great voices that stand for justice. You know, many of the very brave voices are coming from here. So we just have to keep on pushing back. And sometimes even the judges in New York advise people that civil disobedience is a way forward to break through some of the falsehood that we find in society.
Shukran for that. And now that we have some idea of our panelists and they've given us some detail of what they're about, let us jump straight into the panel discussion. And obviously we can't start and understand where we're at right now unless we start from where the lockdown started. And that started with something called a contagion or a pandemic. What is a contagion? How does it impact? There are many versions of the hadith. People have given different versions to it. We will unpack that tonight, and we will ask Maulana Rafiq maybe to give us an idea of the hadith about contagion and how it relates to leprosy as well. Maulana.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Yes, Brother Salim, that is quite a loaded topic, but I think it's very important from my little bit of experience that, you know, the background context is very important for people to fully appreciate how myself personally, how I have come to the conclusion that this is a pandemic. And so it's my personal view, it's my personal position, which I'm sharing. And obviously everybody is free to decide after that. But the background is very important to understand when we come to the final conclusion. And so when you research global politics, you find that they are modern day pharaohs. And always we compare the message from the Quran Sharif. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has spoken about the modern day, about the Fir'aun and Musa alayhi salam. But Fir'aun had this bold claim that he is the highest Lord. So that story is repeated so often, and people fail to realize that that is history going to repeat itself. And so today when you look, you'll find that sitting in London or in New York, there are modern day pharaohs who have the same mentality that I am God on earth because of my massive wealth, and therefore everybody else is supposed to be my slaves. And because of my massive wealth, I can enslave them, indoctrinate them through massive deception. That is the terrain that we find ourselves in today, massive deception. And as my colleague, Dr. Ahmad Salih, made reference to batil and how it is mixed up. So that is a verse which is very, very relevant in understanding this, because Allah Ta'ala mentions there, Ya Ahl al-Kitab, lima talbisun al-haq bil-batil, wa taktumun al-haq wa antum ta'lamun. O people of the scripture, why do you mix up, in other words, confuse the truth, and conceal the truth while you're fully aware? So this is the background in which we understand. This is the background in which we understand the unfolding scenario. So when you look at the industry that is there today, the industry has emerged starting out from the oil and energy industry, which through the massive generation of wealth was able to start off the chemical engineering and the pharmaceutical industry, which then led to further domino effects. The pharmaceutical industry, while linked up very strongly with the banking system, with the chemical engineering like IG Farben, I mean, people can do their research, you'll go into a lot of detailed history, documented history about IG Farben. And so IG Farben was the spin-off of the pharmaceutical industry. The pharmaceutical industry became so powerful, eventually they were able to call the shots and actually dictate the syllabi for the medical colleges, and also were able to give grants to the medical colleges on the condition that the colleges would get the grants that they only use chemical-based allopathic treatments as the standard protocol. All other forms of modalities, all other forms of treatment were outlawed as unscientific. So that's how basically they captured the medical system. And from there, you get the vaccine industry, which was so aggressively promoted by this very same allopathic system of medicine. So if you have that background, and on the one hand, now you come to find out years later that this whole theory about germs, microbes, viruses being the cause of disease is basically something that can be challenged, because more and more the honest scientists and medical professionals are beginning to come out with the research and prove quite categorically, quite clearly, that viruses are not the cause of illnesses. In fact, they are described as exosomes that are excreted by the body as toxins when the body gets overloaded with the toxins. So many factors that have been attributed to illnesses, for example, like polio, were actually found to be caused by the poisoning used by the chemical DDT for treating, mosquitoes. So that is one of the research that was showing very strongly it's not actually attributed to the virus, but rather to toxins in the environment. Like that, there are many other similar incidents. For example, the Spanish flu. There's also been experiments done, and the report done, in fact, it's written in this book, The Contagion Myth by Dr. Tim Cohen in detail. The report given by the doctor at the end of this research was a sense of frustration because they were not able to infect 100 volunteers that were, and so many other means of trying to infect them with the Spanish flu culture. They were not able to do so. So these are all different types of experiments conducted that actually refuted the official narrative that viruses are the cause of the problem. Rather, what we are coming to find out from so many other sources, that the germ theory is not actually accurate. Rather, it's the terrain theory of the body, the person's own microbiome, the person's own internal condition that lends towards illness or lends towards health. So if they are able to manage their health internally, they are better able to maintain their health and not fall susceptible to any illnesses, etc., etc. So these are all the new emerging sciences that are coming out. And I'm ending off here. That also bears testimony to the hadith of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam when he said la adwa, that there is no such concept as contagion, because the illusion that is created when we see 3, 4, 5 people in a particular family or a particular environment all getting the same symptoms, then the illusion is on the conclusion that this is a transmissible disease. But Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam refuted that very categorically when he asked the question to the Bedouin who spoke about the camels, getting infected. He said that who gave the first camel, the infection? It is a decree, by the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the scholars have actually reconciled what seems to be contradictory to the point that actually Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam was preventing people from making contact with those who are sick, because he feared that their belief system would be polluted, that they will say that that person passed the disease to me. But actually, the deen of Islam and Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam specifically said that the whatever is written for you from as far as illness and sickness and health is by the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not by what we believe and understand as contagion. So there are many, many books that are written about this by the scholars and the ulama, and translations of that are available. We can make that available for people to read about the contagion from the aspect of the hadith of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Jazakumullah.
Mufti, shukran. Mufti, do you want to expand on that hadith and give us other examples, perhaps relating to contagion? Mufti?
Yes, Salim, very, very well said from Maulana Rafiq Sahib. People get confused with association and causation. Association is like we have now lockdown. We're not allowed to associate with anyone because according to modern day science, at least 1 rate of people will get infected if they associate with everyone. That is what the Nabi alayhi salam actually came and he tried to eradicate that concept from the minds of the people. So you will find another hadith where the Nabi alayhi salam actually sat and took the hand of a leper and made him to sit and eat with him, because that is the highest levels of tawakkul. And there's other examples as well where this concept of contagion has been refuted by the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam perfectly. So Maulana Rafiq is right. It is to remove and eradicate that belief that contagion is something that occurs when people mix with one another. So and then there's also causation. What causes a virus? That's why when the people came in, they presented their argument to the Nabi alayhi salam. He asked him one question: "Man adal awwal?" Who gave the virus to the first camel? Who infected patient 0? who gave COVID-19 to the first patient? So if you can answer that and you know where it comes from, yes, modern day science will come and say it is a zoonotic, it jumped from animals, but then who infected the animals also? Where did it originate from? So that was the message where the Nabi Islam told them that it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who's in charge. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the being that inflicts person or persons with a certain virus. The same causes that is found in person 0 will be found in other people as well, and not necessarily free mixing of people like what science would want us to believe out there. When you in close proximity to a certain person, then you will become infected. If you look at leprosy, for example, Salim, if you permit me just to touch on that aspect, for many years we were told and we believe that if a person freely mixes with a person who is suffering from leprosy, that means he will be infected. But now only science has proven that is not actually the case. You need to be in contact with such a person for weeks and months at a time just to catch that bacteria. And then sometimes they will say they think it may happen. So thinking is not scientific proof also. You need to be accurate, you need to be sure, you need to document all these things, and you need to peer review it, and you have to prove that this is a specific cause. That's why during the latter part, the Nabi Islam took the hand of a leper and he made him to eat from there. Then there's one more incident I can remember, the funeral of Dhul V1D radiallahu ta'ala. The Nabi alayhi salam told him that you're going to die of flu or some respiratory illness, which is of course flu, and flu is a virus according to science. And he said, no, I want to die as a martyr. He said, no, that is also dying as part of martyrdom. And then eventually when he died, and this is during the expedition of Tabuk, meaning during the later part of the life of the Nabi alayhi salatu salam. So sometimes actions during the later part of the life will negate and abrogate those that happened previously during the life period of the Nabi alayhi salam. But nevertheless, he physically helped in digging the hole for Dhul Bijadain, and he buried him personally to such an extent that Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiallahu ta'ala exclaimed, I wish that I was that person being buried there. Now from there we can say there were no protective clothing, there were no PPE, there were no social distancing, there were no masks, etc. Although virology existed, or at least the knowledge existed of virology during the lifetime of the Nabi alayhi salatu salam, and that I have proven also in the hadith of the camel, where the Nabi alayhi salam told them to drink the urine mixed with the milk of a camel. Only now they found out that it has also antiviral properties as well. So you can only give a cure to a person if you understand the disease. So that is how we know that through divine revelation, the Nabi Islam actually understood virology 1,400 years ago. So if I may add that, Jazakumullah khairan.
Shukran for that. Just to wrap up this segment, Dr. Salih, the question is, we know, we understand and we believe that Allah is the giver of life and He takes life. But there's fear at the moment, much fear about the virus killing people. Is it not a form of shirk to believe in the virus kills people when it is that death is set out by Allah and Allah is the taker of life? Dr. Salih?
Yeah, so the question, I mean, it's all tied up. Whatever is going to happen, we have to always tie our camels before we trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Your death is determined, but how you're going to die, sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lays out certain, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala leaves out certain flexibilities depending on our choices that we make. So, the fact that we're going to die, that's for sure. We can sometimes make choices on how we're going to die or not, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has just determined when we're going to be born, and the fact that we're going to die, and the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to send some rizq. But in between, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us so much more. Allah has given us autonomy. وَأَلَّيْسَ لِلْإِنسَانِ إِلَّا مَا سَعَى. Allah has given us we have the ability to change things. In Allah la yughayyiru ma biqawmin hatta yughayyiru ma bi anfusihim. So Islam does not preach a certain fatalism that we must just wait for things to happen, but Islam also wants us to be very careful. I want to extend just the whole concept of the terrain, because I think sometimes we think terrain is just the immediate environment, maybe the air and the water and so on. But many times people allow their bodies to be compromised, their bodily integrity and terrain to be compromised. In northern Italy, with the outbreak of the virus, we had 168,000 Italians were given the coronavirus of dogs. And most of that became one of the epicenters. So if you take these type of flu shots, if we, in 1962, we only had 2 vaccines, and now it's 72, and it's going to be 150 very soon. So if we constantly put these poisons into our body, up to maybe 70, 73 poisons, then we're also compromising our inner terrain. And so that is most important, that we have to build up our immunity, and we have to also protect that inner terrain. The body is an amana. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Islam is sometimes, we say Islam is simple, but Islam is sophisticated. There's a lot of nuances that goes with the terrain. So we cannot just simply say, fine, I'm going to absolve myself of any type of responsibility. If I do not behave responsibly, I do not exercise, I do not go out into the sun, I do not eat properly, I do not live a healthy lifestyle, and I allow people to spray chemtrails and people to get away with certain things, then definitely we are going to live in an environment that is a terrain that's extremely compromised and becomes fertile places for germs.
Thank you for that. So now we've understood that the aspect of contagion, but before the virus really took hold, or the so-called virus really took hold in Cape Town, we had a lockdown implemented on us, and it impacted especially the Muslim community. I'm sure it impacted other faiths as well, but obviously from a Muslim point of view, we understand it because we are Muslim and we know how it impacted us. What did those protocols do for us as Muslims with Salah being restricted in the masajid, Jumu'ah not being able to be performed, and with social distancing and the sanitizing and all of those things? How did that impact us, and should it have impacted us? Maulana Rafiq, maybe you want to start with this.
Okay, if we look at the background of our faith, especially the Salah, which is an injunction which takes place 5 times a day. And the Salah basically is, especially for the males, they are commanded, or they are enjoined to come to the masajid 5 times a day to perform the Salah in Jama'ah. And this is actually where we come together physically. So the emphasis in Islam is coming together of the males, and that is already social contact. There's no social or shaitan's distancing here. It's actually making full contact. So from the 5 times Salah, then we have the Jummah Salah weekly, which is a bigger gathering. Then you have the 2 Eids prayers, which is twice a year, but it's a much larger gathering. Then you go on to the Hajj once a year, which is like 2, 3 to up to 5 million people coming close proximity, almost being pressed and crushed together. But nowhere did you find Islam saying that, accept or making some, exception that if there's a breakout of some disease, then stay away. Or that would have been in the deen, that teaching would have been there, that make an exception in these cases. But the emphasis is a constant thread throughout Islam of coming together. Look at also the hadith where Nabi Sallallahu mentions, ما من مسلمين يلتقيان فيتصافحان إلا غفر لهما قبل أن يفترقا. There are no 2 Muslims that meet and they shake hands, except that before the hands separate, a minor sin of theirs is forgiven. So again, the emphasis of contact. Now we are being taught to show the elbow because you don't want to pass a virus over to somebody else. So all this seems to be constantly contradicting the physical contact, which generates a strengthening of brotherhood between people. That is being broken, and more the cohesion of society has been broken up. No visiting of your relatives, of your friends and your family. So we are being broken up. So there itself already is a major tragic problem, because people believe that if they come to the masjid, the houses of Allah, the center of mercy for believers, that is a place of super spreaders. And I can tell you personally, this is because I already have this understanding from my background. I stubbornly, adamantly refuse to accept this concept. So when I would go to the masjid, I would refuse to abide by these protocols, even to the extent that I was kept out by the chairman of the mosque, knowing that I make the imamat many times there. I perform the Jummahs. They told me, Wallah, I'm not allowing you into this mosque because you're not wearing a mask. You're not going to put another musalla down on the carpet. And I don't believe in it. I don't accept it. So I had to go make Jummah somewhere else instead of my own masjid. So personally, I was impacted by that. But believe me, people are so full of fear. When you come into the masjid, you see the fear that their focus is more on that. I mustn't get virus from somebody else. So he's not focusing on his ibadat. He's not focusing that he's got to connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this has very, very tragically messed up our whole, spiritual connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When we lose the contact with Allah, we are dead in the water. And I feel that this is the satanic plan behind this to separate us. And in this way, we lose contact with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this has really made a major, major impact.
Shukran. Mufti, Maulana just touched on separation and division. We seem to be divided because obviously already we are now social distancing, but also the fact that we actually went to court to have the mosque open and we were opposed. That's the one aspect. The second part of that is even in Hajj and Umrah, we see people social distancing and that is being applauded. What is that correct for us from an Islamic point of view?
Salim, to go to court and to oppose those people who actually wanted to open the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is an action unprecedented in Islam. You see the opposite from the people, the church people, the Christians, they actually went to court to open all the places of worship and keep it open. So they actually showed us something better. Or certain people from our fraternity actually did the complete opposite. So in spite of being unprecedented, you cannot stop people from entering the houses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You cannot enforce draconian laws upon the houses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It does not belong to anyone, to any person. It belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wa anna al-masajida lillah. That the Quran even declares that the houses belong to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You have people facilitating the coming and going of people, which are called trustees. So they need to ensure that the houses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala should be operated as taught by the Nabi alayhi salatu salam, and of course the generations that came after him. So they actually became the biggest oppressors according to the Quran. There's clear-cut text. We don't need interpretations and other people telling us what it means and it doesn't mean. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that who is more unjust than those people preventing others from entering the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One is when the government imposes the closure of masajid, then the sin will fall on the government. One is when certain people of members of the ulama fraternity who ascribe themselves to knowledge, when they come and close the houses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prior to the government's calling. Now those people, that is the pinnacle of corruption and the pinnacle of injustice and oppression, because you are doing something unprecedented, because you are being taught to fear this virus more than you are fearing anything else, all under the false guise of saving lives. I want to ask them, how many lives did they actually save? Because a second wave came, third wave, up to 6-7 waves will come, and we will ride those waves with the best of our surfboards. When it comes, inshallah, we don't fear anything, because we don't believe in contagion like how they believe in contagion. That is the one aspect. Then people loading out Hajj and Umrah, how that is being performed, so coming from the Saudi people and the ulama of that side, they really don't have a say in the matter. And I'll say this because the government decides, whenever you hear one of them speaking, they will tell you that the health ministry, according to the health ministry. So most of these ministries has been captured by greater forces, like Maulana Rafiq has just explained earlier. People, affluent people, they are actually the main contributors to the health sector, and they decide which laws and which rules to make. So you cannot fight against that also to such an extent that people shouldn't even go to perform Hajj and Umrah if these laws are still in existence, because they're going to perform something which really doesn't, Islam doesn't cater for that. Yes, there's been pandemics in the past to an extent where Hajj has been stopped. So stopping Hajj is one thing, and then allowing these rules where you have to perform Salah 1.5 meters apart and certain people can go for Umrah and you have to apply when to go for Umrah. That is also unheard of, unprecedented. So you can see here, there's a greater force. I've just read very, very briefly, and I read an article 2 days ago, German doctors were paid to create fear into the public, and I still have the newspaper clipping. So they actually employed doctors and scientists to create such an amount of fear for this COVID virus, so that fear actually kills the people. If you're not going to die of COVID, I said it in Jummah, then you're definitely going to die of fear, because Allah says, "Wala takhafu, wala tahzanu." Do not fear, because fear brings grief. Grief brings anxiety. Anxiety brings high blood pressure, arrhythmias, and a host of other diseases which will eventually kill you. So yes, basically that is my contribution, Salim.
Shukran for that. The question is about sanitizing. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand that wudu is the highest form of purification, because you have to be clean before you can take wudu. But then you are asked to sanitize when you come to the masjid. Imam Ahmad, can you please enlighten me on that? Do we have to sanitize after performing the spiritual act of ablution?
Many doctors here believe that just simply washing your hands with clean water is far more effective than sanitizing. Sanitizing is problematic in that there's alcohol, and many people are developing diseases because of repeated alcohol. Some people actually even got close to fire, and they burned themselves. So I think it's highly risky. We must throw out and rather keep a jar of water and soap if we feel that is a type of sanitizing, or do like Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, he constantly throughout the day walked with wudu. So you don't take wudu only 3, 5, 7 times, but maybe even 10 times a day whenever you do not have wudu. Islam has taught us that. I mean, when Europe didn't know how to bath, and the Queen every 2 years took one bath and became something public, Islam had ghusl, and we had wudu on a regular basis. So no, I don't think we should go along with this, especially even the mask. Many people call the mask now the face diaper, because most of the viruses come through the nose. We have 50 trillion viruses in our body. And if the bad viruses come out and we keep on putting that carbon dioxide into these type of masks, then it's not healthy. Sweden is now banning the use of masks. So I think we need to do, it's also not healthy for elderly people and for even children to constantly be having those masks. And these are coming from people who are editors of medical journals. Social isolation. I think in the Cape Town situation, you don't allow people over 60 to get into the mosque, and children hardly go to the mosque. How are the children going to learn? I know when I was imam and I took my little son and I put him in the mihrab, and by the time he started to speak, he read Wadduha so beautifully. We, through osmosis, we allow our children to pick up these type of practices. So we must get the children back. And here in America, we have these large Palestinian mosques with sometimes hundreds of women. We have 3 Jummah, and maybe over the 3 Jummah, we have 2,000 people attending. And the women used to come, and now very few women, they're even closing the women's sections. So it's impacting the women, but it's also especially impacting our widows and our orphans. Some of us don't even want to hug the orphans. Now imagine that child of 3 or 4 doesn't understand when they lose a father or a mother, why someone else doesn't even want to hug them so that they could heal and just cure themselves of that particular grief that they are. So I think it's extremely cruel to our women. It's extremely cruel to our orphans. In the UK, 26,000 elderly people are dying. Some people feel they are culling them because you are putting them through a process that is really going to, that is really killing off the elderly people. So I think we are extremely cruel to our elders also by following these protocols. And most of these protocols do not really make sense. We know what happens in taxis. I've been flying with airplanes, a number of flights during this time, and we were sitting next to each other. When people eat, they take off their mask. There's no social distancing, no mask, and so on. So a lot of them do not make sense, but the malls are open, and the places where the globalists are in control, those places are never closed. The abortion clinics are open. There's a mushrooming of marijuana places, and these places are packed. The bars, when people are drunk, they cannot know what is social distancing. Those places have been open for quite a while. But if it's the same virus with some variants, not speaking of the word mutation, some variants across the world, why is it that some places have total relaxation and other places have military lockdown? So these are some of the questions should be asking us. I want to just maybe spend one more minute. And I think one of the other big issues with Islam, plus also with the medical fraternity, and that is the issue of pluralism. Now, in medicine, they had certain values, and those values are accommodation, informed consent, patient autonomy, nurse and doctor autonomy, precision medicine, personalized medicine. But especially sometimes the doctors would say lust to adri. I think the word is isopathic. They do not know what the reason for this is. Most of the diseases also are iatrogenic, where it's actually hospital-generated diseases, because they do not get the right food, they do not get the right exercise or even breathing air and so on. But coming to the medical pluralism, if the current position throws out all the values of allopathic medicine, and the vast majority of allopaths that are coming forward and whistleblowing, they seem to be the majority. I want to challenge the myth that those who follow the master narrative of the people that enforce the lockdowns, that they are in the majority. Because when I find a Dr. Tom Cohen, I find he has 100 million viewers. I find Del Bigtree, 75 million fans. And I find people like Kennedy going to Berlin, and more than 1 million people come to the marches. These things are being suppressed, so we cannot know. But I have the greatest suspicion that the group that is opposing the master narrative, the Gates and the Fauci and the Soros and the Rockefeller and the Rothschild narratives, that they are actually more in the minority, and they have all the signs with them. And with the other group, we have fraudulent signs. So the last point then is, coming to Islamic pluralism, if we have 4 imams in Sunni tradition, Imam Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah, Imam Ash-Shafi'i, Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, Imam Malik, and if one of them disagrees, say Abu Hanifa, and the 3 are together, we do not say Abu Hanifa is unorthodox. He's still orthodox. Within the Hanafi madhab, we have Imam Zufar and Muhammad bin Hassan Shaybani and Abu Yusuf and Al-Imam al-Azam. If Zufar disagrees with all other 3, including his teacher, we do not eject his views. It is very sad that the masajid have one and only one interpretation, whether it's an interpretation about the leper, shaking their hands and so on, and they enforce it upon everyone, not looking at the sociological and the psychological and the political and the economic factors that are also at play. But because these things have been planned for 10, 20, 30 years, and just to end off here, Salim, we find that these politicians were so devious. They approach our imams, they do the Maghrib Salah with our chief, our head imams, and then suddenly, they can do absolutely nothing wrong. They prayed Maghrib with us. This president was at that event with one of our leaders. This governor invited these 3 imams. And so now the imams actually close the masajid 2-3 weeks even before they're being asked to close the masajid. And they enforce all these rules, even much more being forced in churches and other places. And so that is, I think, very sad. We need to bring the medical pluralism and the Islamic religious pluralism back. And this is not about bad-mouthing another group. We have groups, those Fatawa groups, and they are colleagues. We love them all. We love their children, their family. This is expressing another point of view which we think is a majority view and which is supported by science.
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
In terms of, are our ulama generally in South Africa and our mosque committees extremists? Because even the CDC says you only have to wash your hands, but we still have to sanitize. Is that an extremist take on the matter to sanitize your hands when you can actually wash your hands?
You know, I don't want to label anybody, but the point is this: if you really look at it closely, you know, I actually wanted to add this point just now, but seeing that you raised this question here, so it's relevant. The fact is that our skin has got friendly bacteria that forms a protective layer against infections. Now, when you keep on applying sanitizer, which is alcohol-based, like in most cases, 70% alcohol-based, what are you actually doing? You're actually destroying your protective layer of the friendly supporter bacteria. And so it's much more easier for infections to set in. Not only that, that sanitizer is being absorbed through the largest organ of your body, which is your skin. So every day, especially when you go into the shops, you see the people handling the tills and so on. Every few seconds, in fact, they're spraying and they're sanitizing. I'm thinking to myself, my God, how much of chemicals is going into their skin? And then they wonder where the second wave and the third wave is coming from. You're damaging your own internal environment, number one. Number two, the masking. Now they are admitting in so many different forums and platforms, they're admitting that the so-called second wave or coming third wave is largely being driven by bacterial pneumonia from the mask. Because if you go zoom in onto the mask and you'll see the amount of bacteria that's breathing there, and you are holding over your mouth, you're not breathing the natural oxygen which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has designed for us, but you breathe in back your carbon dioxide, making your blood levels more acidic. When you are more acidic, when your blood level is more acidic, you're going to give growth to much more infections and illness. So this is the mask is doing the damage, but we are told, no, we're not forcing you to take the vaccine, but we're being forced to wear the mask. So what is that? It's conditioning, social conditioning, that you will not get back your freedom. You will not be able to live back as normal unless you accept what we tell you. So they are preparing the people for complete enslavement. And this is what it is doing to us. So this sanitizing and this masking and social distancing is all part of the process of breaking us down, conditioning us to become obedient slaves to creation and rebelling against the creator who we should be actually obeying.
Okay. We want to justice to that segment if we don't ask the question about the plague of Amwas. Were the mosques closed during that time? And what did the people do? Mufti?
There's many people that think that the masajid were closed during the plague of Amwas. But if you look at the history of Mu'adh bin Jabal, remember he was the most knowledgeable of the Sahaba. He had knowledge. That's why he was sent to Yemen. And the Nabi al-Islam praised his knowledge also. So you'll find one narration of Al-Harith bin Umair. He says that when this plague happened, especially during that time, that Mu'adh bin Jabal explained to the people that this plague is actually a blessing from Allah, etc. And after that, he made dua that, Ya Allah, grant me and my family also a portion, meaning let us succumb to this plague and let us pass away in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is one specific word in this narration that I want to share to the people. It says, Faraja'a min al-masjid. He returned from the masjid. So where did he return from? The masjid. That is indication that the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was open, and the most knowledgeable of one of the most knowledgeable of the Sahaba, Mu'adh bin Jabal, he actually came from the masjid. He went and prayed, and then he went and attended to his son, who was his most beloved also. So yes, the masjid was open, and that was a real plague, Salim. That is not a respiratory disease, not a virus. We're speaking of a bubonic plague. You can look up at the history of Amwas. People should know this. This is recorded in one of the books I'll mention here, is Sifatu Satwa. So you can find the reference of this incident in there, inshallah. Jazakallah.
Shukran. Okay. Dr. Sali, you mentioned earlier about the way at funerals the widow is not looked after, or the children. Let's talk about funerals and the practices that's currently being impacted. Now, from my understanding is that the right of one Muslim over another is that you attend his funeral. So that is the first question, is the limitation on people attending, the body bags that people are being placed in, and then obviously the fact that there are social distancing, so the widow and the orphans are not being sort of looked after and feel that connection. Doctor?
I think some people have, it maybe sound facetious, but they really mock the idea of social distancing and how very clever this virus is. Because it seems that in taxis, the virus know that they mustn't attack people that sit in close proximity, or in malls, or in airplanes that are packed. When it comes to the certain funerals, the virus will know when there's 21 persons and not 20 people. And when it comes to weddings, the virus will know when there's 51 people, not 50. Some places said, well, 250, and all these numbers were changing just at whim. So I think we really need to question how are we being played. One of the Quranic challenges is for us to always think and to always ponder and to always use our akal and to always use our intellect. Why is it that intelligent people are buying into this type of thinking without using their own independent thinking? Even if it's just something that is called firasa, ittaqu firasat al-mu'min fa innahu yanzuru min nurillah. I know that when there's a widow and that widow is all alone, siblings do not go up and hug that widow, or the cousins do not go up and give a hug. Fine, if you feel you need to go and wash yourself after that, go do that. The least we can do. Can we remember just prior to COVID, how we had our funerals and everyone is cramping into the house, people coming for the 3 days and 7 days and 40 days, and the Haddad services, which are also essential services, created an amazing amount of healing within our widows and our orphans. We knew what their needs were. We took food to them. We played with the children while the widow was trying to overcome the grief. So I think we have just lost every type of common sense when it comes to this very clever virus, who knows exactly when it's curfew time. If it's 1 minute before curfew time, the virus is not going to attack people. If it's just a minute after the curfew time, the virus will may be able to attack people. And we had the silly thing of closing beaches, and in the water, the sea water, there's certain healing. In the sea sand, there's also certain healing. Telling people not to go in the sunshine and vitamin D is the most important part that's also curing. During some of the bubonic plagues and the Spanish flu, they found that the people that cured the quickest were the people that had nursing, great nursing, that people that helped them as nurses, whether they were qualified or not. We are making appeal to our healthcare workers. Study the Spanish flu, and you must realize that the same people are operating today, because during the Spanish flu, even the healthcare workers were also given the vaccinations and they became sick. And those people who didn't take the vaccination had to go and help the healthcare workers. So please be very careful. If your employers are forcing you, it's by time that you stand up and sue them, because the legal system is the last anchor of democracy. So sue, and sue. That is going, even if you have to take out trustees to court. Have multiple court hearings. A trustee has not the right to fire an imam simply because the imam believes la adwa wa la tiyara, that the Prophet clustered this contagion belief with all type of superstitions.
Shukran, Dr. Salim. Mufti, just quickly, just to go back onto the body bags and the drive-by, even funeral procession. Is that in line with our Sharia, or is that taken from a Kafir point of view?
I think, Salim, the government or the scientists has just proved their own discrepancies by first saying that we need to put people in body bags and, of course, shield them properly and stay away. And now they've relaxed the laws themselves, saying that it is not so dangerous. So you see, that is theories. It is not science. It is what they think, and they don't have conclusive proof for that. But it is against Islam. Of course, if a body has been proven to have a certain type of virus, or the body is burned beyond recognition, or you cannot make out these bits and pieces, then only we'll bury people in coffins, in body bags, but not when you're using assumptions, saying the person has died of COVID-related illnesses. No autopsy has been performed, no blood test has been performed, so they don't know the cause of that. That is just to drive fear more and to break the fabric of society. That is part of the actions or communal actions. See, Islam is a lot of communal actions. Very quickly, Mullah Rafiq has mentioned it, Hajj, Salah, and also janazas, weddings, etc. These are communal actions because that forms part of the brotherhood of Islam. Yes.
So Maulana, the question that remains is that now we're having these body bags and we have so few people at the funerals, but also the family, they can't find closure because they've not even seen their father or mother or brother for one last time. They weren't a part of the ghusl. I mean, the ghusl was done somewhere separately, and there's even comments that the ghusl was not even done properly when people were just basically been sprayed over. Are those things, what is that doing to our community?
Jazakallah Salim for that question. You know, actually, while you're asking that question, the one point that's sitting right in the front at the top is the factor of fear. So the fear factor is actually the real epidemic. More than anything else, the epidemic of fear has dominated the entire globe because of the narrative that's coming out from the mainstream media, the poison that keeps on coming and indoctrinating the people, the fear of the virus. So because of this fear, misplaced fear, we are now, you know, not able to make closure with our beloved ones when they pass away. We're so afraid to even make contact with them, right? I know I was in a Jummah not too long ago where the Khatib was sharing his experience that he and his son were seen to many janazas, funerals, and they were very hurt and surprised to see that own sons and brothers and husbands were afraid to go into the grave to bury their beloved ones because they know this one's got COVID, this one's got COVID, so we don't want to go in. So somebody else must do that. Somebody else has to bury your beloved one because you're afraid of the COVID virus, which is, again, because of being deceived. So there is no real closure. We are so deceived in this way that we don't give the proper rights of our beloved ones when they pass away. All of this is happening. Yet if you look what happened in Italy with the high rate of deaths, what was the WHO telling the governments around the world? Bury the bodies in body bags because there could be contagion, there could be transmission, etc., etc. So they were doing it for quite a while until somebody challenged that mainstream lie. And they started to say, listen, we need to check how did these patients actually die? So that's why you have forensic pathologists. How did this escape our intelligent people out there? That's the thing that's happening. We have become so intellectually numb. We have become lazy to actually, interrogate the mainstream narrative. You have forensic pathologists to actually investigate what is the actual cause of death. So when they actually did that, when they actually challenged that narrative, and they actually checked the bodies, they found that it was not because of the virus. They were not able to isolate or identify the virus as the cause of death. So there again, we see that this was largely through deception. So this is where you find that this type of lie has impacted on people. They're not able to have closure with their families because of the fear. Not only that, related to this, another right of Muslim is to visit someone who's sick. We find the hadith mentions that is a right of one Muslim upon another. Not only that, but the hadith emphasize the rewards of a person who goes to visit the sick to such an extent that Nabi Sallallahu mentions that Allah Ta'ala will say on the day of Qiyamah that you don't come to visit me. He will tell this to his slave on the day of Qiyamah. The person said, how could I visit you? He said, no, but my servant was sick. You didn't come to visit me when my servant was sick. You would have found me there. So in other words, the emphasis of visiting the sick. So where is there a place for this narrative of contagion? Because now we are saying, no, the person COVID quarantine, visitors allowed. So again, we find that this is constantly contradicting what our deen is teaching us. So this contagion myth has no place in Islam, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay. So now, I mean, I would imagine that we would need a vaccine against fear, but yeah, what we do know is that the COVID-19 vaccines are being rolled out in this country and worldwide. Mufti, can you just quickly explain to us again the difference between a vaccine and medicine?
A vaccine is something that you take basically for a future possible outbreak against a possible disease or infection. A disease or medicine is something that you use for something that is already existing. You have a condition, a precondition, diabetes, high blood, etc. So it has been identified, and for that you will use specific medicine. Salim, you're not going to wake up one morning and say, I think I'll be getting TB, which is infectious according to them in the near possible future. So I'm going to start using this type, or I'm going to get HIV, so I'm going to use antiretrovirals. No one does that. You see, because they know it's the possibility of getting that disease. It's only a possibility, not a definite thing. That's why it's called a vaccine.
Maulana Rafiq, in terms of the tests and trials that have been done and being implemented right now in terms of the rollout, and we see many Muslims at the forefront, the doctors, frontline workers lining up for this. Is there a message that we can give them in terms of what they are missing? Because what Mufti is saying that the vaccination is for something that might happen. What is your message to those frontline workers, Doctor? I mean, Maulana.
Okay, so, you know, basically the idea of vaccines in theory sounds ideal, sounds very good. In other words, to try and, you know, kickstart the immune system so that it can recognize an infection and a virus. So that's the basic idea. It sounds good, but in the practical, functioning, we find that this doesn't actually work as it's meant to work. First of all, people actually ignore the miracle of the immune system. If we study the immune system that Allah has created, it's such a marvelous system that Allah has created for us, that as long as you give it the correct support and you avoid those things that cause harm and damage to the immune system, your body can actually fight off most infections, over 95% of infections. So that's the one thing, and there's a lot more to discuss about that. But in fact, we don't even need to go and study the effects of the corona vaccines, because go back in history, study the entire vaccine industry and it is miserable track record, the harms it has caused, the deaths it has caused, the damage and the paralysis it has caused, all the different vaccines in the past. That track record is documented. Why have so many parents gone to courts to try and claim damages? Some of them were able to claim damages, they were successful. But now the pharmaceutical industries who are producing the vaccines made sure they lobbied the government of the US and many other governments that they will not be held liable for any damages. Why did they do that? Because they know that there's going to be a lot of damage. So this is already happening way before the corona vaccines became an issue. So there are so many other vaccines in the past that we can, discuss and go into detail what impact it has. Look at the famous one that they give for cervical cancer to girls, the HPV, how that has caused so much of neurological damage. I know for a fact when I went to visit some of the schools where they cater for children with disabilities, I was shocked to see there were virtually like hundreds of these children in about half a dozen schools in Gauteng. And nobody asked the question, how did these children get all these disabilities? But when you dig down the rabbit hole, you can say easily over 70% of them are related to neurological damage from vaccines, and nobody's talking about it. So I don't even need to study the corona vaccines. The mere industry, the vaccine industry is so corrupt already, that already puts me on alert, number one. Number two, the track record of the previous vaccines already causing so much of damage. Number three, look at the parents, interview the parents who have children who have been damaged by vaccines, and you will shed tears with them because you will see what they're going through. I mean, there's cases of parents who are interviewed on video. I've got those documentaries which we can share. It's professionally done. It's not just some 10-minute, fly-by-night thing. It's done professionally, where they interview parents and they show you their son, 20 years old, walking around with a diaper, with a napkin, drinking a bottle. And they say, this youngster can't get married. This youngster can't get a job. When I die, who's going to look after this child? He's totally dependent. He's 20 years old, emotionally still like a 2-year-old. So there are dozens of children like this. You can see them on video documented. This is not some hopscotch, thumb-sucking ideas. Yeah, these are all documented. But people are intellectually lazy. They don't do their due diligence. They don't go do the research. They're looking at a few ingredients and say, no, it's nothing wrong. There's nothing haram here. So we can say it's safe. And because our governments are telling us, and our medical professionals we trust because they're pious Muslim, they're telling us it's safe and we must take it, we must take it. So bismillah, we must go with it. We're not doing further in-depth investigation. We're not doing our due diligence. We don't investigate the history. The very same people who pulled the weapons of mass destruction, which turned out to be the weapons of mass deception on Iraq, where thousands, if not over 1 million people were harmed by this program of weapons of mass deception. Thirdly, they're the very same people who pull the Boko Haram and the ISIS scam on the world, making the world believe in a certain narrative. These are the same people. You can track them. Do the homework, brothers. There's plenty of evidence. Time doesn't allow us. These are the very same people pulling the COVID scam on us. Jazakumullah.
I just want to ask Mufti a question again in terms of what Maulana's mentioned about pharma companies not taking liability for this. Is this ethical? And the fact that basically Johnson & Johnson and those vaccines are still in trial version. So is that all ethical to give that to people and for nobody to take a liability for this? Mufti?
It's completely unethical, Salim, and our listeners out there. You need to take liability because you're promoting something that has to do with the health and possibly fatalities and morbidities as well. So what the secular courts found in many of the cases that were the people went to court and took them to court against them, the secular courts ruled in favor of those defendants that or the claimants against the vaccine companies. So from there we can establish that it is massive fraud and deception. So they are actually fraudsters, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is reprimanded his Nabi alayhi salam in the Quran, and for us as well. You cannot advocate and fight the case of a person who's a known fraudster, because the secular courts declared them as fraudulent people and made them pay out billions in fines. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prevented us from arguing their case. So any Darul Iftar, any alim out there who's promoting a vaccine without proper knowledge and without doing a case history and a background history check on these people, due diligence, etc., he is actually going against the Quran because he's promoting the case of a known fraudster. And that is not permissible in Islam, so we can only speak about the ingredients, etc. We cannot fight for these. Then we are not ulama, we're becoming sales reps for these big pharma companies.
Okay, shukran. Just to get a perspective from a mother, I've got Laith, just to give us a background in terms of what vaccines are done to her children. Laith, are you with us? Laith? Okay. But sure, she's probably still on mute.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakumullah khair for the opportunity to just mention some of my experiences. So I have 2 children who I believe now to have had been vaccine injured. When I've looked at the literature recently, because previously, it was a lot of the causes of sort of vaccine injuries. We didn't know there wasn't much research into it, and actually describing the harms about what vaccines can cause. And I have about 20 years of experience of working with disabled children. And a lot of these children, the one thing they all have in common is that they were all vaccinated. And you hear very tragic stories about mom saying that, the kids were fine when they were born. There didn't seem to be anything wrong with them. And then, something strange happened and the child suddenly has lost all ability to speak or swallow, or even to develop as a normal human being at all. And I've watched I've seen in person countless stories like that. And then also just watching The Truth About Vaccines, is a very depressing series, but a very enlightening series as well, about all the injuries that occur to these children. And we really, it's something that we need to look into more seriously, because vaccines are advocated as the safest thing in the medical world, and it's completely untrue. And so we really, like the Maulana Rafiq was saying, we just really need to free ourselves and stop being so intellectually numb, and just really opening up to that. I mean, alhamdulillah, my children are not, don't have serious injuries. My son has a difficulty with concentration, but alhamdulillah, it's not as bad as some of the serious injuries that I've personally had to deal with, you know, as a health worker myself. So, you know, just thank you to the ulama. This is just really something I feel really needs to be highlighted with the youth out there, the young mothers who are having children who are being bullied by nursing staff or being bullied by doctors into taking these vaccines without themselves. The doctors themselves don't know what the harms are behind this. And so it's, so thank you so much for highlighting this.
Dr. Salih, just to sort of go into the next segment, but while we have our eyes still on vaccines, in terms of what the Quran says about what we should be eating in terms of our immune system, can you unpack the view of eco-halal in terms of the vaccine and having a Quranic mindset?
So the Quran says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala permits for us what is tayyib and what is pure, and makes haram on us those things which are khaba'ith, things that are not suitable, or things that are harmful, or things that are perhaps one could say poisonous. Abu Hanifa rahimahullah once saw people throwing camel's intestines into a river, and he wanted to know how long do these fish in this river, how long do they live? And he decided he's not going to eat the fish of that river for as long as the impurities are in their system. So we look at, for instance, many of the foods that we are eating, and some of those foods have, like chicken. I went to Amish farms. I went around the US, Nevada, and other places to slaughterhouses. But if these animals are being fed animal byproducts, these are herbivores being fed animal byproducts and other type of poisons, then it is not just enough to do the dhabah or the slaughtering and following some of those particular guidelines. We have to look at how the animals are raised. We look what the animals are being fed. And if the animals are in battery farms, then that is something we should be worried about, because it's going to impact our health. And then some of the rabbis, now you know, in Orthodox Judaism, they sometimes throw away almost 2/3 of the cow because of the kosher rules. And even on top of that, they would say, fine, if the workers who are working with a kosher plant, if they are not treated well, then the whole project would be unkosher also. So we have to go way back into how the people that are being treated, every source, right up to those people that are impacting our halal, that to us is what we call the eco-halal. So we must, the Quran constantly speaks about halal and tayyiban, the halal that is also pure. Many people have moved towards organic, but people like Bill Gates with his Monsanto and those other groups, they are trying to destroy farms. We have the issue in India now, 1,000 farmers for months now camping out. So they want to destroy the natural way. In, I think, some of the African countries, people are jailed if they use the seeds that were in their family for generations. Moving away from nature and creating some of these 750, I think, million mosquitoes that are genetically engineered, it's just going to lead to greater harms. Some of these shayateen, because they definitely worship shayateen, some of them are Freemasons connected to evil jinn. And these people really want to see the children of Adam being destroyed. وَلَأُضِلَّنَّهُمْ وَلَآمُرَنَّهُمْ. And you know that particular ayah there, that فَلَيُغَيِّرُنَّ خَلْقَ, also changing the khalq of Allah. Everyone agrees that even the word mRNA already is an admission of genetic engineering. Anyone who wants to understand what mRNA means. So it's important for us to know that we need to put pure things into our system. There's one thing, one other ayah that I want to bring everyone's attention to. The Quran says, ظهر الفساد في البر والبحر بما كسبت أيدي الناس. At times, things that we attribute as acts of God are actually acts of man. So sometimes we want to be angry at Allah, whereas sometimes there are other human beings behind everything. So you have to exhaust every type of cause and first see, is it an act of man? And then you say, fine, no, it is not an act of, this is definitely perhaps an act of Allah. But you can go everywhere, even to the bubonic plague, and you find the filth that used to be in Europe and how the rats used to get these fleas, and that created the, and Islam really teaches about an-nadhafa nisful iman, or at-tahur shatrul iman, cleanliness is half of faith. So fortunate, I think a lot of our doctors and our imams, they think that everything happens in a political vacuum or an economic vacuum or historical vacuum. If they have no idea of Kissinger and his neo-Malthusianism or Fabianism, the frog in the boiling water syndrome, or they have no idea of how the economics work, the very Rothschilds that destroyed the Ottoman Empire, then I think then they will come up with half-baked fatwa that are not fully formed or informed, because they did not look at almost every aspect of society in order to arrive at that.
Doctor, what is Malthusian? I think many people will be asking that question. What is Malthusian?
Yeah, I think it's a form of eugenesis. A lot of, in the 1909, it was formulated, and some believe communism is also an outgrowth of that, where they have to cull and keep the population down. And you can keep the population down by inserting disease, by wars, by getting ideologies where people will kill each other. So this is all part of that. But Kissinger, I think in the 1970s, felt that the number of people in Indonesia and Pakistan and Turkey and Nigeria and must really be kept and culled. And so I think that is part of the evil plan. It's a type of eugenicist way of thinking. And the interesting thing, I was just looking at 1984 of George Orwell, and there was a little afterword, Eric Fromm. And Eric Fromm actually speaks about how many of these people felt that they speak about the horrors of peace. Now look at this, the horrors of peace and not the horrors of war. So they said if you do have the horrors of peace, they don't want peace. The United States, for more than 200 years of existence, only 18 of those years the United States did not have, was not at war with some other community. 100 million Native Americans were slaughtered in the Americas. So that's all part of the eugenicist projects. And once is with the, either through missiles, war through missiles, and we had war through microbes is nothing new. So okay. This is all some of in the toolkit.
Inshallah, we'll unpack that again. Just quickly, just to move on, just in terms of where we are, in terms of people referring to the worldview, but we have the situation that the question that we have to ask, how does human law, man-made law, compare to divine law? At what point do we say we can follow the man-made law and leave Allah's law? Maulana, you can start off with that, please.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Well, as Muslims, obviously, we know that we are guided by firstly the Quran, which is pure revelation, and secondly, by the hadith and the Sunnah Mubarak of Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is considered as wahi ghair matlu, non-recited revelation. So these are the two primary sources of law. So for believers and for Muslims, this is our main source of law. Inil hukmu illa lillah, that the law giver is only from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and there are many other verses to that effect. So as Muslims, do we give that as the first priority? Obviously, if you're living in a country which is governed by secular law or by non-Muslims, then you have entered into a pact. So you live by those basic bylaws and laws, but you cannot also at the same time allow that to totally refute or totally contradict the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So as far as possible, you have to also constantly keep the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in front of you, because at the end of the day, we are going to be answerable to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because وَلِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ. To Allah belongs what is in the heavens and the earth. So the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is supposed to dominate, and we cannot sit complacently and just accept blindly what is set out by man, especially when it contradicts the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like now today we see that these are the same forces that are legalizing abortion. These are the very same forces from the same camps legalizing gay marriages. Now that's the question to ask. Why are these laws being forced through? Like, for example, gay marriages, which you look at the African countries, for example, governments are very uncomfortable, but they're under so much of pressure from outside to force that law through. Whereas the people by nature goes against their very instinct. So where's this coming from? What's the agenda behind it? It all goes to back to population control. The people at the top, the modern day pharaohs, like at the time of Fir'aun, when he saw his throne was being threatened by the males of the Bani Israel, so Allah Ta'ala mentions, يُقَتِّلُونَ أَبَنَاهُمْ. He slaughtered the males. In another place, يُذَبِّحُونَ أَبَنَاهُمْ. He really made qurbani and slaughtered the males. So was that not a form of population control or not? Definitely it was. So the lesson in the Quran Sharif is that there will always be people who will have the spiritual disease of greed, lust for power, who will be prepared to carry out such evil of population control on mass scale. And today we're seeing it in so many different ways, in such sophisticated manner, that virtually take your breath away. It's happening hidden in plain sight. It's happening right in front of our eyes. So abortion, gay marriages are being promoted under cover of vaccines. If you look at the book written by Dr. Leonard Horowitz, who's a medical health officer of the US, people who are concerned about medical. 14, what is the subheading? It says vaccines for genocide. He's a medical health officer who should be in the forefront of vaccinating. He calls his chapter 14 subheading vaccines for genocide, and he gives you meticulously referenced works where he's getting all his research from. So there are people who are beginning to see through this, that the Malthusians or the eugenicists are practically obsessed with culling the population, because they act as gods on earth out of their lust and their spiritual greed for power.
It was quite powerful. Mufti, just to try and understand when Fatawa come out and say that we need to focus on the worldview, does that mean that they set aside, that you can set aside the law of Allah because you're focusing on the worldview?
Salim, no, you cannot do that. There's no worldview. Every Darul Ifta will give his own view based on whatever evidence is in front of him. There's no worldview because there's no one single body of ulama that everyone ascribes to. There's Al-Azhar in Egypt, there's the Saudi regime in Saudi Arabia, so everyone, and then we have the Deobandi ulama out in Asia, etc. There's no particular one world view. It is subject to certain influences how these fatwa will be formulated. So in some countries, perhaps the government will override the fatwa of the Grand Mufti, or those jurists who give a fatwa, or they will do it in conjunction with that people. Then you'll find independent people like myself, who's got no affiliation to no party, no political party, no medical fraternity, etc. So we will look at it objectively and see all the evidence available, and then from there we'll give a fatwa. So whoever's promoting the worldview, he should bring worldview. Worldview actually means there is ijma, there's consensus amongst the ulama. To claim that you need to cite references, credible references, that where did the entire ulama fraternity or majority of them come together and say that this is permissible?
Shukran. Okay, we've basically finished our segment in terms of the panel discussion. We have.
Salim, could I add to that?
Sorry, you're breaking up.
Could I add to that topic?
1 minute, please.
I say, could I add to that topic?
Yeah, 1 minute, please. Bismillah.
Yeah. So Yeah, I think what we must also realize that Islamic law is so fabulous and fantastic that much of common law came from North Africa through Sicily and then went to England and all. International law designed in 1625 by Hugo Grotius, he massively plagiarized the work of Al-Shatibi, Maqasid al-Sharia. Many people attribute now the United States Constitution to some of the Ottoman laws and the Islamic influences. And there were also times where President Jefferson referenced some Ottoman law. But the problem we have even in the Western society where they have massively plagiarized much of Islamic law. And if you look at the Supreme Court of the United States, they have the freezes of Musa, of the Prophet ﷺ, of Umar as great lawmakers. But the constitutions, the ideals have been maimed and distorted. We also find that within Islamic law, we have sometimes some of our Imam become part of what we call rogue fatwas or murderous fatwas. Some of the Azhar, for instance, passed fatwas that thousands of the Muslim Brotherhood could be slaughtered in the prisons when Al-Sisi took over. And we know what happened now with Saudi attacking Yemen and Libya. But we look back up time, and in South Africa, we find that the Aimma came together and said, once a masjid is built in District 6 or anywhere, it should never be touched, it should never be demolished, it should never be repurposed. And when apartheid was dismantled, we moved back into those areas, and our masajid, Muir Street and Aspling Street, and those masajid was still intact. So there are times when the people will have to rise up, like in Sri Lanka, where the bodies are cremated. People all over the world objected to that. Imam Abdullah Harun, when he was told, people of your color cannot go into Langa, he still went and to give the dawah there. Tuan Guru, when he decided, no, we have to give the first Jummah khutbah, and he did it in protest. So they have to resist. And even Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu said, if I am not judging by the book of Allah and the Sunnah, then do not listen to me, do not obey me. But there's a hierarchy, and a hierarchy is such that revelation is far, far superior, and anything else, any rational law cannot supersede the revelational law.
Okay, so we have a few questions. One question we have is, how does one interpret the hadith, run away from the leper as you would run away from a lion? Mufti, do you want to perhaps give us some insight there?
Yes. Yes, Salib, that hadith of run from a leper, you must remember there's different types of verbs that you get in the Arabic language. One verb is for commandment, meaning it's fard, you have to do it. Other verbs will indicate it is sunnah or mustahab, preferable to do it. In this case here, the verb that is being used, run, is indicative of something being mustahab, something being preferable, and not compulsory how other people would like to interpret it. If that is the case, then it will contradict the hadith where the Nabi alayhi salam actually took the hand of a leper, went and sat with him. Then the Nabi alayhi salam went against his own advice and his own actions. So that is what we call a qarina, a sign to show that the first hadith of run away from a leper, it is only something preferable to do. And why is it preferable to do? So that there be no stigma upon that person. If in the unfortunate event he develops leprosy, that should not affect his aqidah, in his creed, in his belief that he's been infected because of associating with such a person, and then he will feel that contagion as people believe today, and then he'll think bad of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that is basically what the Nabi alayhi salam told us: safeguard yourself from stigma, from blame, and from dwelling into things that you do not understand the belief in qadr and qada of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Stay away from those things. It is for your own good. In that way, it is preferable for you to abstain from mixing or sitting with a leper. He didn't say you should completely abstain. He just said avoid a situation where you will end up blaming yourself at the end of the day. Gee.
We have, when we were closing the masajid and we social distancing in the masjid, the Quranic ayah was used of saving one life is like saving the entire of humanity. But the same ayah is not applied when one person might be dying from taking the vaccine. Is that a contradiction, Maulana? I don't think.
From my perspective, from the long journey that I have come studying global politics and especially vaccines, definitely there is a contradiction. The people giving the advice in authority mean well, but they are misguided, or they are lacking, or they're deficient in a very, very great area of information. And therefore, it is important for them to really look in the background, behind all the vaccine industry, for them to be able to make that statement. Because from my perspective, you are going to be promoting something which will be actually taking life. Because as you can see today, all across the world, reports are pouring in. This one passed away, that one, all healthcare workers, many of them. And if not passing away, they're suffering serious neurological damage from the COVID vaccines. Right in real time, this is happening. Even our colleague, Dr. Faiz Kirsten, has mentioned that in the previous one. In real time, you're seeing all this happening. Reports are coming. And the beauty is we are globally connected. So the reports are coming in. But people are still, as the Quran Sharif says, "Lahum a'yunun la yubsiruna biha." For them, they have eyes, but they don't want to see with it. They have hearts, they don't want to understand with it. What is this? That facts and evidence is putting in front of you, and you simply dismiss it as conspiracy theories. For God's sake, how much more are you going to keep on hiding behind that cloak that's a conspiracy theory when the evidence is mounting? So therefore I say, look at the Quranic verse that Allah says they have ears, but they don't want to listen with. They have eyes, they don't want to see. Lahum qulubun la yafqahuna biha. They have hearts, but they don't want to understand it. Ulaika kal an'am. Those are like cattle. Now cattle is almost synonymous with vaccines, you know that. That's where vaccines was first started. They were vaccinating cattle. So you go into the root word of the word vaccine, it's actually referring to cattle, when they were inoculating cattle. And that's why they talk of herd immunity. They refer to us as cattle. Are we accepting that we want to be like cattle, that we don't have the ability and the akal to think and critically analyze what's going on? So we're just going with the flow and blindly accepting this, that this is going to save our life and it's safe and effective. Really, I don't believe it for a second. And my 7 grandchildren, alhamdulillah, bifadlillah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I thank Allah ta'ala for having alerted me through this journey. None of my grandchildren have been vaccinated, none of them, alhamdulillah. And none of them are suffering from any major serious illness. I myself, not observing any of these protocols. I'm 62 years old, and I go into masajids and I make contact with people. When I meet my colleagues and family, I shake hands with them. And alhamdulillah, bifadlillah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I have not suffered any illness. I don't take any medication up till now, because I'm working with the natural system which Allah Ta'ala has granted us. Jazakumullah.
Allah increase you in goodness and grant you long life, inshallah.
Ameen.
The question that arises is that we are importing fatwa from abroad, and specifically from Arab countries where they are having ties with the occupiers of Palestine. How is that possible? Should we be doing that? Doctor or Mufti?
Yes, sir.
Mufti Saab, you want to?
No, you proceed. You proceed, Doctor. I'm listening to you. I'm enjoying you speaking.
Yeah, so I think that is, Jazakumullah. So, al-fiqh al-waqi', always contextual. Imam Shafi rahimahullah moved from Baghdad and he moved to Masr, to Cairo. He changed on mu'amalat, not on ibadat, because there was a different context there. It is very unfortunate, and we actually have to look at how many of those imams are not really free in the Middle East. They have tyrannical rulers. We know what Saudi MBS did with the journalists in Turkey. We know what they're doing to Yemen, destroying masajid, attacking funeral and wedding processions and so on. We know how these people, they are into also human trafficking and sex trafficking and many of these other even. We are dealing with leaders that are khaba'ith, that are evil, and unfortunately those ulama, there are at least 3,000 Saudi imams from their own madhab in prison in Saudi. Now, you cannot trust Al-Azhar. It has been compromised since the time of Nasser. We cannot trust the scholars coming from these places where the rulers will imprison them or take their lives. So if there's no autonomy, then the fatwa becomes problematic. So that is one thing that we have to bear in mind. And then we have to look at people that have no conflict of interest. وجاء من أقصى المدينة رجل يسعى قال يا قوم اتبعوا المرسلين اتبعوا من لا يسألكم أجرا وهم مهتدون. So there's no conflict of interest, and also people are rightly guided. They speak the truth even if it's going to hurt them. I think the most important hadith that the of la yuldahu Muslim bi juhrin marratayn, that we should never be bitten by the same hole twice. Now, as Maulana Rafiq was also saying, the people that use lies to destroy the Middle East, they use lies to colonize us, they are blood. How could we trust them? 90% of the people that are being hurt are unarmed civilians, and that is not collateral damage. Those are all by design. So if these people believe that millions of people can die in order to get more money into their pockets, we can never ever وَلَا تَكُنْ لِلْخَائِنِينَ خَصِيمًا, as Mufti always quotes. But then also, I think, unfortunately, Ulama becomes so taken in when the rulers reach out to them, and they would try to twist and distort every type of interpretation in order to please the rulers of the day, and they are not pleasing Allah and not looking at the 100 years ahead, how they the 7 to 10 generations from today.
Mufti, we're getting close to the end of our program. Just a couple of questions that we've got still. Mufti, the question is, it's a loaded question. We have many ulama bodies in South Africa, and the point was made that I follow, this is the point that somebody made, I follow the ulama bodies irrespective of what they say, and I don't need to look at the facts. What would you say to such a person?
Well, I don't have to say anything. The Quran is already saying that on the day of judgment, that the public will dispute with these people, the leaders that are taking them to Jahannam, and they will claim by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we followed these people. So blind following and following without investigation, that won't be an excuse or a way towards salvation, not even on the day of judgment, Salim, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is speaking and giving a scenario of what will happen in the fire of Jahannam, meaning they will already be found guilty, and they will turn against their leaders and say, Inna ata'na sadatana wa kubra'ana. We followed our leaders, fadalluna sabila, and they left us astray. So that won't be any excuse. You need to follow. You can follow anyone you want, but remember that Rabbi said, "Istafti qalbak," that ask the fatwa from your heart. If your heart tells you that this is not correct, and you find other people, other ulama also saying there is other supporting evidence, then you can decide from that. No one's fatwa is binding upon anyone. The people, they've got a choice what to follow.
Shukran. Maulana Rafiq, our last question that we have simply is that can a kafir state such as our country dictate what we do Islamically and culturally?
Okay, that's quite a question, but definitely if you look at what was mentioned earlier with regards to our masajids, وَأَنَّ الْمَسَاجِدَ لِلَّهِ, and know that the masajids, the house of Allah, belong to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And also the fact that we know that when we erect a masjid, it is made waqf. So therefore nobody owns it, we are not able to purchase or sell the masajid. So that possession is solely to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that masjid belongs to. Any rules that are foreign to it. So therefore we know that even the other aspects that are divinely ordained from the Sharia, these are rules that cannot be changed, that cannot be interpreted, against its values. So therefore, this is something which is divine law, and that cannot be interfered with. It is not something that can be abrogated in any way. It is for all eternity. So man-made laws cannot interfere with the laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are absolute and are, as the hadith mentions, al-Islamu ya'lu wa la yu'la alayh. Islam is higher and elevated and nothing can override it. So this is the system of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is perfect. It is for all times and does not tolerate any change in any way, because then it's going to completely pollute the pure teachings that have been given for the benefit of mankind.
Shukran. Okay, we have just a couple of minutes left. So I need to wrap up. I need to ask each of the panelists.
I have a...
Sorry.
Just a comment on the state.
Yes. 30 seconds, please. Hello?
Yeah, so I think when it comes to the state, not all states are the same. People have studied the Sharia index, and they said that sometimes some countries like Sweden and New Zealand and these places are closer to the Sharia index than Muslim majority countries where they are tyrant rulers. So what we need to look at, Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anhu, during his time, he used to appoint people to criticize him. And today we have like a whip in parliament and so on. Harun al-Rashid had Bahlul, the wise fool, to come correct him and tell him the truth. So I think a lot depends on the state and a lot depends on the system, and even the same state have different rulers, a change of rulers, and then things would be changing from time to time. Maybe under Nelson Mandela, it was different compared to under some of the other rulers for that matter.
Shukran. Okay, we've got each panelist, if you can give your closing comments. We've got 60 seconds for each one. Then we have to absolutely finish off this thing. Can we start with Mufti? 60 seconds. What would your closing comments be?
I would advise anyone to first look at it objectively, study both sides of the narrative. Don't call us denialists. Leave this name calling. We're open to discuss and sit with anyone. The fatwa that I've given regarding vaccines, it is still standing unless someone proves to me that I am wrong, or they prove otherwise. If they can't do that, then it is best then to keep quiet. First could be first could be hilmin or antik bi ilmin, as Imam Dhabi said. Let's speak with knowledge or keep quiet through forbearance. If you don't know what you're talking about, then that is a different story. Especially our health workers out there, do not be guinea pigs. Do not subject yourself to poisons, being vaccinated through poisons. First, do your research. You people have access to all these things. You don't have to take our word for that. But remember, there's no long-term safety that has been established until now. So open your eyes and listen to what has been discussed. Inshallah, if you have valuable input, then we welcome to hear from you. Jazakallah khairan.
Jazakallah. Maulana Rafiq, your closing comments?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Well, going back to the point that if we don't look at the big picture and understand the context in which our world is in, then we are going to be taken in by the massive deception out there. And even if you look at the Quran Sharif, in many, many places, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala warns the believers that this world is deception upon deception upon deception. So in so many places, the word ghurur, if you look for the word ghurur, you will look and you will see how Allah warns the believers about this nature of deception. The shaitan also is known as gharur, the great deceiver. Dajjal, the meaning of Dajjal, the great deceiver. So if you look at all these terms of ghurur and deception, we are finding ourselves in so much of deception. For example, recently we were under so much of pressure to accept this narrative that carbon dioxide is harmful to the planet. That is something that is not a massive lie that the world is being forced to accept, and therefore we have to pay taxes on carbon emissions. Then that is just another example of how the world is being fooled. And because of that lie, Bill Gates is pushing the idea that people are the greatest emitters of carbon dioxide, and in order to bring the carbon emissions down, the first place he wants to start was to reduce carbon emissions is to reduce population growth. So that already tells just to what extent lie upon lie upon lie. So in so many ways, look at the GM foods. we have been told that that is safe and healthy and so on. That's another example. So we need to understand that we need to very, very objectively, critically look at the facts around us. Don't accept blind what is coming, because you're going to get sucked in, your children are going to be affected by it, and the future generations are going to look at the history and say, how did our forefathers actually look at this? How did they get so deceived? Because they will see the destruction and
Maulana. Dr. Sari, can you wrap up, please?
Yeah, I just one or two quick last points, and the one is the whole issue of false philanthropy. Many came and put up clinics in African townships, and they pretended to be doing good for the people, but then they were actually inject disease, whether it's an AIDS disease or any other diseases. So the arsonist becomes the firefighters, the poachers become gamekeepers. We have to be aware that there's a lot of wolves in sheep clothing, and that includes Gates. Gates had 20 years ago, people cakes into his face, and he invested $100 million that time to just improve his image. And so we can't, some people, if they are fooled and think that Gates is still the greatest philanthropist, he invested $250 million in order to buy over most of the media, because he's going to make 20 billion or maybe 100 billion in the long run. Jeff Bezos last year made just 70 billion. If we look at most of the diseases, they are because of comorbidities, and the people that had comorbidities, whether it's TB or all that, they died because of those diseases, and also they were not treated properly. And also the case of the 1,500 cases of COVID, where Dr. Ian Hart took those cases, and then he took the results to the labs in Stanford and Cornell and the top universities, and all of them agreed that there wasn't the COVID virus has not been isolated or purified. These were all cases of people with comorbidities, sometimes dying naturally and sometimes because of the hospital system dying because of that. But we love and we pain, we cry when even a single person dies. And so that's important. We love you all. We love all our colleagues in all the groups where they are, the Fatawa groups. And we just want to show them that you cannot look at this. It's not isolated from, it's not in a political, in economic and historical vacuum. Do not take authority as a truth, but take the truth as authority. And the pharmaceutical companies do not care about cures. They only care about customers. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us against makr. Makr is mentioned 7 times in the Quran. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us always the ulul albab, the people that go to the essence, and people that do not just stay on the circumference. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless the like of Mufti and Ibrahim and Maulana Rafiq. Maybe 1 minute where Maulana Rafiq must speak at least about his mentor, A.S. Peer, and how that mentor influenced him, and Maulana Nasim Hunter.
Shukran. So just to summarize from what we heard tonight, the point of deception came through quite clearly through things like false philanthropy, the GMO foods, differentiating between halal and good when it's supposed to be one way to look at things, halal and good. And then the vaccine being the uncertainty attached to the vaccines, all of those things are part of the deception. And with that deception comes fear, and with that fear, people follow blindly. So that is what we're at the moment. Obviously, there are people that don't see differently to what the mainstream media is saying. We are open to discussing these things with people so that we can reach a common understanding and that the truth must prevail at the end of the day. I wish to thank our panelists, Mufti Ibrahim Smith, Maulana Rafiq Ismail, Dr. Sali. May Allah increase you in goodness and may Allah grant you long life, inshallah.
Ameen.
So that you can inspire us.
Salim, if I may just very quickly mention that there is a website that we have set up. It's still got a long way to go, but already about 30 to 40% of the work is done. So if you go to healthwealth.org.za, healthwealth.org.za, there's a number of documentaries under the section called Player. It's being revamped as we talk, but already there's a lot of information that's useful there. Even the documentary is called Pandemic 1, Pandemic 2, Vaxxed, will give you a greater insight into the whole corruption in the vaccine industry and so many other things, and lots of other stuff related to the virus called coronavirus. So plenty of data there, and much more will be added. So kindly, if you want more references to what we've been discussing, please visit healthwealth.org.za. Jazakumullah.
Jazakumullah khairan. Shukran for everybody, to our listeners, to our viewers. Shukran for tuning in. And if you have any questions, please feel free to message us and to use our social media platforms to get into contact with us for more information and for future panel discussions and interviews.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
We're going to end with wal asr.
نعم.
والعصر إن الإنسان
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله.